introduce our next presenter, and obviously she doesn't need a lot of introduction. She's the New York Times best-selling author, and she's got a great podcast, Balance Bites, that I know everybody listens to. I'm sorry I'm not doing the whole, because I can't get it to come up correctly. Anyway, but I think she doesn't need a lot of introduction. She also has 21-day sugar detox. Diane Sanfilippo.
Thank you. Okay, I'm starting a timer. Hi. So this is kind of a cool follow-up to what Sarah was talking about with sort of the getting away from the diet mentality. And I'm going to talk about reintroducing non-paleo foods. So I know lots of you guys, how many of you have done this whole paleo thing for maybe more than a year? So you're probably at the point where you're like, should I be following all of these really strict rules, or can I eat some sushi with white rice now and then, right? And it is something that we all kind of need to figure out for ourselves. I think a lot of the talks we've all been to, that topic has come up a few times where, you know, a lot of us have programs that we create for you guys to give you some rules, because actually one of the things I've been learning a little bit more about when it comes to neuroscience is that sometimes rules really do help. So it's funny that Sarah was just talking about how diets don't work, which we know that that's true to a degree, but sometimes actually having some black and white rules frees up some mental capacity, and it's actually easier to make those decisions. So it's interesting. But so I don't have slides for you guys to look at, because in 20 minutes, if I had slides, there's no way I would get through them all. So I just have some notes for myself here. So the first non-paleo food I'm going to talk about would be grass-fed dairy. How many of you guys eat dairy? Maybe grass-fed if you can. See? Okay, cool. One of the things that I'm going to go through the same kind of format for each of the foods I'm going to talk about. It's going to be when, so if any of you guys are taking notes, or if you're not, it's going to be when to either reintroduce it or not, and then why or why not, as well as how, so like what kind of approach to take, and then also some of the symptoms you may experience when you reintroduce it that would tell you it might not be working for you. So dairy, and with most of these, it's kind of the same guidelines of if you've eliminated it for at least 30 days, which I know a lot of us have heard that. Sometimes you're wondering, like, where does that even come from? Well, it takes about 2 weeks to fully repair your gut lining. So when you get rid of foods that irritate your digestive system, it takes about 2 weeks for that to heal up. Now, why would we take it to 30 days if it only takes 2 weeks? Well, it's really about kind of creating that habit, and also, you know, you may kind of stumble. Day 5, day 7, we want to give you more time to be able to get that stuff going. So in Practical Paleo, I have a whole guide to leaky gut where I talk about a lot of this stuff. So if you're not sure what I'm saying, I pretty much cover it all in the book, if I'm remembering, because it's been a couple of years, and anyone who writes a book, it's like you black out after it happens, and you're like, what did I even write in there? Apparently, there's a quote on the t-shirt here of my team that I was like, I said that? When did I say that? That's pretty good. So you guys can talk to all of them later. But so why or why not with dairy? So if you sense that your body could use a variety of probiotics, so we all know grass-fed yogurt, kefir, those types of things can be really beneficial. If you listen to Chris Kresser's podcast or read his blog at all, you know, he's a big proponent of dairy. There's lots of great nutrition to be had there. And I think that yogurt, even in kind of the junky, Yoplait, high fructose corn syrup sweetened world, even that type of yogurt, to some degree, I honestly think that over the last 30 years, the fact that we've been crazy about yogurt has been a little bit of a saving grace, even though it's not yogurt I recommend people eat. I'm still working on my Greek yogurt blog post. I'm sorry. I take those things very seriously, so you can just wait for that one. But anyway, so if you think you want some more probiotic content and you want to try yogurt, that's a good place to go. If you think the nutritional benefits might be helpful to you. If you're having a hard time getting in vitamins A and D, otherwise there can be some pretty good amounts in grass-fed dairy. So again, my thing with dairy is unless you're just kind of having it now and then at a restaurant where it's not going to be grass-fed, I don't think you should bring dairy into the home that's not grass-fed. I just can't make a really good case for it. If you're trying to eat it for nutritional value, that's the type of dairy it really needs to be. What's happening? Oh. Do you need to? Is it doing something weird? Okay. Alrighty then. So that's kind of my take on dairy. And I also think, you know, when we talk about not being paleo perfectionists, well, we know that dairy isn't a quote-unquote paleo food. And I think that the dairy situation when it comes to like grass-fed meat versus non-grass-fed, obviously we're doing the best we can to get the grass-fed. This is one of those cases where you don't need to eat dairy products. You don't have to have them. So reintroducing them in that really high quality, I think is one of those places where I would kind of keep the level. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most goat cheese typically will be grass-fed. I think, anybody know if that's incorrect? I think most goat cheese is grass-fed. So anyway, dairy is also, well, it's a real whole food. And if you really love it, I know there's a great ice cream place here, Lick. They source grass-fed milk to make their ice cream. So if you want to enjoy that now and then, it's a great way to do it. And you're also supporting great businesses when you support the grass-fed forms versus kind of the conventional stuff. So how would you reintroduce dairy? So again, you've done your 30 days without it. And some people tend to think that just going a little at a time is a good approach. What I learned in my holistic nutrition studies is that that's not really the best way to find out if it's really affecting you. Because if you're eating a little bit and then you just wait a few days and see if anything happens, you may or may not get that really big response. So the analogy I like to make here is, say you don't go to the gym for, a couple of months, or even the 1 month, maybe the 30 days, and you go back into the gym and you just do like a light walk on the treadmill or a light row on a rower, you're probably not going to notice much afterwards. But if you just went in and tried to squat really heavy or do something really intense, you would notice that effect of like being away from it and coming back. So I actually want you to eat that food 2 or 3 times that day after your elimination, and then wait and see what happens for a few days. So it's a pretty big insult to your system, basically, but, go big or go home. So so if you think you've struggled with high lactose foods, so this is something that, when you reintroduce, you'll discover which ones you do better with or worse with. If you think it's high lactose foods, you can reintroduce the lower lactose foods first. That'll be things like yogurt and kefir, as I mentioned. So what happens is the probiotic, the bacteria actually eats the sugar in the yogurt, which is why yogurt's very sour if you're getting the plain type, because it's eating that lactose, that milk sugar. So it should be very, very low in lactose to almost maybe none, especially if you make it at home over a longer fermentation process. Anybody make their own yogurt? So it should be really not very sweet, and that's how you know it's really low in lactose. Then you can move on to some things like the goat or the feta, the soft cheeses. Those will be a little bit lower. If you've struggled with more high casein issues, then the soft cheeses, again, will probably be a little bit easier for you to tolerate. Hard cheeses are going to be really difficult. So when you start reintroducing, if you reintroduce something like a hard cheddar, a raw cheddar cheese, and you notice you react really badly to that, give yourself maybe 3 days up to 2 weeks to kind of come down from whatever reaction you had, and then you can try maybe something that's softer dairy form than the hard form. Does that make sense? Those are the things that kind of have different types of proteins going on. For a less formal reintroduction, so after you've maybe done your 30 days, if you just want to kind of see what happens, if you have some dairy, instead of buying it and bringing it home, you just have some when you're out to eat. A little bit on a burger, maybe there's some feta or something like that, and just see what happens. So just a couple of things that happened to me, because dairy is a really weird scenario for me. If I eat goat cheese or feta, my digestive system feels totally fine, but I'll break out. So sometimes I choose to eat it, and usually it's not right before I'm going to stand on a stage or be on a video or something like that, because I know what it's going to do to my skin. But if I eat something like a hard grass-fed cheese, like nobody better be in the bathroom, because that's going to be a disaster. It's really hard on my digestive system. So it's something that you'll figure out when you get rid of it and try it again. So some of the other really common effects of poor dairy tolerance will be acne and eczema. So it could be even more severe than what I was talking about with like a little breakout, psoriasis, digestive upset, and then any IBS-like symptoms. So if you're like, I don't know why my digestive system still isn't right, I'm not eating grains, I'm not eating sugar, but you're doing even grass-fed butter. I hate to say it, but grass-fed butter, I actually don't do that well with it. I think it gives me some acne. So something to keep in mind there. And then again, some ideas of why not to reintroduce it. And a lot of this stuff is going to repeat with the next few things, so I'm taking a little bit more time on the dairy. If you're still experiencing any signs or symptoms of leaky gut, so that would be any type of general inflammatory issues. So people come up to me with like all kinds of weird, I have this pain in my ear and like my knee does this weird thing. I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with you, but there's some kind of inflammation going on in your body. And so whatever food that might be for you, or lifestyle choice. For some people, it's just they're training too hard all the time. And I can't help you lower inflammation until you lower those stressful situations in your body. If you experience any other IBS-like symptoms, so I kind of went over that already, that would be a reason not to reintroduce it. Like, even if you just really want the yogurt, just keep it away. If you think you have like a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which I did this whole podcast recently with Dr. Allison Seebecker, which was amazing. Like, we totally nerd out on that stuff on my team. We have a whole bunch of information coming up for you guys on that. But if you know that you're gluten intolerant for sure, dairy is something I would really caution you against reintroducing because there are a lot of cross-reactive proteins. So that means there's a lot of amino acid chains within the dairy that mimic some things that are happening in gluten, and the dairy can be really problematic for you. Interestingly enough, a lot of folks who think that they're lactose intolerant are actually gluten intolerant, and when they get rid of the gluten, they can tolerate the dairy. So that's kind of an interesting. I had a friend of mine growing up who she was like years and years of trying to figure out her health problems. And after I learned about all this stuff, one day I said to her, I don't actually think you're lactose intolerant. I think you're gluten intolerant. So when you're ready to give up gluten and change your whole life, you let me know. And apparently that really got in her brain because, a couple of years later, she went and did it. And now she's actually going to the same nutrition program that I went to. So yes. And then again, if acne persists, even with grass-fed butter, where you're like, well, everyone's eating grass-fed butter. I need it. It's really good for me. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. There's other places to get vitamins A, D, and K2 than grass-fed butter. Liver, egg yolks, sunshine, eating leafy greens that we can help convert that K1 to K2. So white potatoes. You guys eat white potatoes? I know. See, I don't know. You guys just wanted validation. Everybody was like, I'm going to come here, and she's going to tell me it's okay to eat all of these non-paleo foods. So again, if you've eliminated them for at least 30 days, if you're doing an autoimmune protocol, so are you guys familiar with what that means? We're also eliminating things like nightshades, which white potatoes would be, also eliminating eggs, nuts, and seeds. And so nightshades also include tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. So if you're doing an autoimmune protocol, I wouldn't reintroduce white potatoes till probably at least 60 days out. Like, you really want to give yourself time to heal, especially if you've been doing the protocol because you're dealing with some kind of flare. So and what that means for those of you who don't have a condition, it's when the symptoms just really start to act up. So things can be really rough at that time. There's no reason to say, well, I want to start eating white potatoes again if you're dealing with an autoimmune flare. Like, let's just wait for that. So some reasons why you might reintroduce white potatoes: if you're just not getting enough carbs. Some people really are highly active, not getting enough carbohydrates, and you just want some variety. Maybe sweet potatoes are just getting a little old, right? Again, if you've been doing this for a year or more, sometimes you get to that place. Or maybe you travel a lot, so that's something that for me, I travel a good amount. I can't always get sweet potatoes. So if I've figured out the white potatoes feel okay for me, I'm gonna go for it. And that's what, I can order a baked potato out at a restaurant, no big deal. It is a real whole food. It's just that we know there are certain compounds in the potato that can be irritating for some people's systems. So typically it's things like joint pain, but sometimes it can be more that systemic inflammation. And they're really inexpensive. So that's another great reason to reintroduce them. They're inexpensive, and it's basically a fresh food. Of course, it lasts a long time before you might eat it, but it's a great sort of cheap source of real food carbs. And that's one of the big arguments people make about grains, that it's really an inexpensive way to get calories. But white potatoes are pretty good for that too. Excuse me. So reasons not to reintroduce them, I mentioned about the autoimmune situation. If you are diabetic, whether it's type 1 or type 2, and you're still trying to get that blood sugar under control, I definitely am of the belief that type 1 or type 2, once people get a lot better handle on their blood sugar levels, it's not just about whether they eat too many carbs. It really is the type of carbohydrate, because the body does respond differently to real whole food carbs versus something refined like bread or pasta or candy or donuts or any of that stuff. So if somebody is diabetic and hasn't gotten blood sugar under control, I would say don't reintroduce the white potatoes. Give it some more time. And then how to do it, little by little. I would generally base it on activity levels. Like, if you're not that active, and you just once in a while have some white potato, especially out at a restaurant. But if you're really active, that might be something you can do a lot more of at home. Or if you're just a naturally pretty lean person who really needs those extra calories. And then skins or not, you have to test that for yourself. Generally we're gonna peel the potatoes, but sometimes if you're just into the culinary aspect of the fact that it looks better with some skin on it, or you just want that variation, but you'll have to test that out for yourself. And then again, some of the common signs that you're not doing well with the potatoes would be joint pain and irritation, skin irritation, and then carb tolerance issues. So where this really comes in is the way that we store body fat. And this is something that I see on my own body quite often. And this is something I learned about at the Poliquin Biosignature certification, where if you're storing more body fat in the midsection, which can obviously be a stress response, a cortisol response, or the back of your, for the ladies, like the bra area, that's kind of a sign that you're just not tolerating carbs that well for whatever reason. It may be your activity level isn't high enough, or just your body doesn't do great with them. So that's a really good way to kind of figure it out without even really having to keep doing this back and forth of testing. I'm checking my time here. I don't know what their clock says, but mine says 15 minutes, so that was 15 minutes so far. Okay. And then this is actually the last section. So white rice, other non-gluten grains, that would be things like quinoa, corn perhaps, and then legumes. So this is kind of like a big category here. But again, you've eliminated them for a while. And I would say if you're doing an autoimmune protocol, again, if your symptoms are there, this is like, lots of people are like, why are you so strict? Look, if you've got an autoimmune condition, and that's a huge percentage of the population who finds paleo, like you have to be sensitive. If you don't have an autoimmune condition, you have to be sensitive to that person who does, because they are doing everything they can, and medicine is not the most helpful thing. So let them have their strict situation and let them try and figure it out for a while, because that may really be what they need. If you don't need that, that's a different situation. But I would say at least 90 days. You want to give the whole strict thing at least 90 days before you try something else. And again, if you're just not getting enough carbohydrates, you want to do some white rice, see how you feel with it. And so the reason that, for those of you who aren't really sure like where this whole thing came from on the white rice versus brown rice, the reason that we started, or I would say probably Asian culture started polishing the rice, was to remove that harder to digest portion. That brown portion is actually harder to digest. So while it does hold some B vitamins and minerals, we don't digest and absorb them that well because they contain a lot of anti-nutrients as well. So when we eat these grains, our digestive system just doesn't break them down that great. Whereas when you're doing white rice, it's mostly just starch. There's a little bit of protein content in there. So that's one reason why it can be irritating to some people. Generally, what is irritating is a protein, unless you have a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and then it could be the carbohydrate. There's a lot to talk about. I only have 20 minutes. I can't get into it all. My book was 432 pages. Obviously, brevity is not my strong suit, but so again, if you aren't getting enough carbs, if you travel a lot, I think if you travel a lot, it's a really good case for figuring out what works for you, because there's a lot of moving parts. No pun intended there, but there's just, you just don't know what's going to happen. So you really need to know what your non-negotiables are. Like for me, gluten is a non-negotiable. I always ask about it. I kind of like make a big deal about it. Dairy is a pretty big non-negotiable, but like I'll peel cheese off of something if I have to. So those are the kinds of things you need to figure out for yourself. If you just want a variety in your diet, and I know my friend Russ Crandall has an amazing book, The Ancestral Table, and he's talking about ancestral foods that we would eat. And so maybe your family had this amazing dish with lentils, and you're at the family, gathering, and you don't want to be the weird one, or you just want to eat that thing. Go ahead and eat it. See what happens. Maybe you'll notice nothing. But from my perspective, it's not a reason to say, okay, now I'm going to eat lentils every day. It's just a case to say, okay, like I can eat those. I feel okay when I eat them. When there's a gathering or I really want to have this traditional dish, I go ahead and enjoy it. No big deal, move on. The case sort of against it is that sometimes when we're eating too many grains, and in this case, I'm really just talking about like gluten-free grains, we're crowding out some of the more nutrient-dense foods. So that's really kind of the biggest case against it, once you figure out that you digest them well. Sorry, I have like a hair right there that's tickling my arm. So when you find out that you digest them well, you feel okay with them, it's really more a matter of, like, if you start adding those in every day and you're not also continuing to eat great high quality protein, vegetables, those kinds of things, if you notice that your plate started shifting to more of the white and brown, like grain type things, reassess that. So I know, like, even in my household, like my fiance, he needs to eat more carbs than I do. And so it's like we're eating the same thing, plus he's eating rice or potato or something like that. So it's not instead of. Does that make sense? And I think that's a really important point if you're doing it at home. What else? And they're just inexpensive. So again, we'll get this white jasmine rice at Whole Foods. That's kind of pre-cooked. I think it's frozen and it's par cooked. And so it's 2 minutes. Like, I do not want to spend an hour or, take an hour ahead of time to think about baking potatoes for him to eat. I'm like, I like to cook in 20 minutes. And so if it can't be done from now to 20 minutes, like, I don't want to have to think about it. So, getting something like that that's a little bit easier, it's kind of a good way to go. Are you giving me a time, like, flag? You give me 1 minute? Ah! So again, why not to reintroduce it? If nutrient density is a really key factor, does anybody go to Terry Wall's talk? I love her. I just think that, like, her approach is so no nonsense and just like, here's the facts, take them or leave them. Like, this is what we're doing. So if nutrient density is your number one goal, it's not probably the best way to go. If you think you might have a mold sensitivity, she actually talked about this too. If you think you might have a mold sensitivity, and how would you know? Well, you don't react well when you eat foods that are known to be moldy, like blue cheese is a moldy food. Fermented foods, if you don't react that well to fermented foods, or if you've gone into a room that has like a high level of mold and you react to that, it may be one reason not to reintroduce gluten-free grains, because they're stored way before you're eating them. So there are some ways around that. I know in San Francisco there was there's a brown rice company where you could get like local rice, so that's kind of a better bet, but that's kind of it. The mold sensitivity might be another reason not to reintroduce them. And I'm out of time, and I think I'm going to take your questions now.
Thank you, Diane.
That was so quick.
I think we have time for maybe like 2 questions, and then Diane is going to be downstairs doing a book signing, so you can follow her that direction. And
yeah, you guys can ask whatever questions in line down there.
Question?
No problem.
Hi.
Hi.
So if you do the elimination for a long time, like 6 months or longer, and then you try and reintroduce a food, and you have a really bad reaction, is it hopeless? Like, do I just give up on eggs? I really want to be able to eat eggs.
So if it's eggs that are the issue, the way that I would approach that, and I didn't cover them because they're considered a paleo food, I would reintroduce cooked yolks only first. Have you done that? Or did you do the whole egg? So what I would do first is yolks, but cooked, because the yolks won't tend to have as many of the proteins that'll be problematic, and cooking them will help to break them down. And so, as much as I love a raw runny yolk, if you want to test the sensitivity, do a cooked yolk, and then if you feel okay with that, then try the raw yolk. So maybe you're, soft boiling an egg, and then you're just going to let the yolk come out and taste that and try and eat that. And then you can move on. And then there's just different levels of the egg being cooked or not that can also make a really big difference. But most often it's the white that's problematic for people. And I did talk about this also in Practical Paleo. I know there's like a blue box that's about the anti-nutrients in eggs. So, but it may or may not be forever. I don't know. It's different for everyone. I'm sorry, there's one other thing. Sometimes for people, if they eat eggs a couple of days in a row, that's too much. Sometimes they can have like one, and then 4 days later have it again. So that's another.
Hello, yes, my 6-year-old granddaughter is having really bad allergies right now. Do you have a protocol for kids that?
It's really not different for kids versus adults. If someone's experiencing allergies really severely, to the degree that it's possible to complete an autoimmune protocol. I think you say it was a 6-year-old. With a kid, it's going to be really tough. It just depends on how much of their food you control versus what you don't. But I would just get out as many of the potentially allergenic foods as possible. In Practical Paleo, in my book, in the autoimmune protocol, it lists out exactly what that means. Or you can look at what the squeaky clean plan is and just kind of make sure that the kid's at least doing what that is and see from there. It's really the best bet.
And we're out of time.
Okay,
Again,
follow
if you
me.
have additional questions, she'll be doing a book signing downstairs right after this.